This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. It is not intended to cause or induce breach of an existing agency agreement.
And welcome back to Vancouver Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Scalina.
And I'm your other host, Matt Scalina.
And Matt, I am so fired up for today because we've got Associate Professor Tom Davidoff from Sauder School of Business, UBC.
Right.
We've also got Andrey Pavlov. He is a professor of finance at Beatty School of Business at SFU.
That's right.
And it's a tete-a-tete today. It's the great debate.
They call it a tete-a-tete.
Jeez, great debate. I'm having a tough time over here. Great debate, UBC versus SFU.
And I don't know if they'd say it was UBC versus SFU, but
That's
we will definitely say it's UBC versus SFU. This is a great conversation. Tom Davidoff, past guest fan favorite. Andrey Pavlov, past guest fan favorite.
Right.
We're bringing two past guest fan favorites together. We did this once before. Over at Tom's place pre-COVID, which was a great conversation, the great debate.
Yeah, great spread too.
We're back, and this time I feel like last time there was a specific policy I haven't listened to in a while that we were really talking about. Today we start with taxation. There was this kernel that we decided to get everybody together to talk about, but that's not what we're talking about today. This is really. Where are we at as a city and as a province and as a country? What are we getting right? What are we getting right with housing? What are we getting wrong? Where's the economy headed? Forecasting the real estate market. This is all things BC, and spoiler alert, these guys don't agree on much.
It's so complicated when you start talking about the details, about understanding the housing crisis in BC, also talking about affordability, how there should be government intervention, if at all, in any market. And it gets more complicated as this conversation goes on. And you're right. These guys, they like to think that they agree on stuff, but there was some, I caught some eye rolling in the studio.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I can't even recall. I feel like we spoke.
It was me.
Oh.
It was me every time you talked.
I was going to say, because I feel like I did actually speak. Last time we just literally hit record and they just went at it for about an hour and a half. This time we actually were a little bit more involved in the conversation, but not much. We didn't want to insert ourselves too much.
Yeah, and I like to think that we're pretty savvy on the market, but when these guys get going, I feel like
get out of the way.
We don't know where I don't have a footnote.
Get out.
I don't have a footnote.
Get out of the way.
Okay, before we get to that, what else do we got?
What else do we have? Well, Adam, we've been spending a lot of time on these new shirts.
Yes.
Now, it sounds like everybody's been asking.
We changed the color.
It's going to be maroon. It's going to be maroon.
Yeah.
That's the big reveal today. Yeah, that was all weekend.
It's kind of an old, wasn't the old Canucks jersey maroon? Is that kind of...
Oh, like the really old
Canucks, really old
like
Canucks
the V.
Jersey. Yeah. It's almost that maroon.
It's almost like a throwback.
It was strategic in that regard.
Right.
And so we've got some really nice maroon shirts. It's still the same amazing quality. We've given out so many shirts in the VREP community. You know where you go if you want a shirt from the Vancouver Real Estate Podcast, Matt?
Where do you go?
You go to Instagram. And
we've been putting in a lot of work on Instagram.
Well, yeah, no kidding. And it's going to just continue to snowball because we're putting out a lot of content.
Well, and here I just want to say one of the types of content we're doing here.
Sure.
We're going through our back catalog.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways and thinking what's stuck out. What was a great interesting point of that conversation, and we're what do you call them?
Creating threads
around past episodes and the most recent episodes. So if you don't get a chance to listen to the whole thing, you have, hey, here's an interesting takeaway from this week's guest.
Well, for
really
example,
useful stuff.
For example, we did one of the things that came up on our recent show with Brendan Ogmanson,
Right.
was the generational wealth transfer.
That's right. That
So
was
we
one of
did
them.
a post that summarized what the generational wealth transfer is, right down to the dollar details.
Right.
And then we also did a separate post, which was a video clip, a reel, with Brendan Ogmanson talking about the generational wealth transfer. So this is the kind of, if you can't always tune into the show, but you want to get some of the best points, you want to be following us at Vancouver Real Estate Podcasts on Twitter.
And you know what? I'll just
Wait,
say
not Twitter.
No,
we
no.
don't even go. What's Twitter? Instagram.
But here's the thing. They look like Twitter posts. And I just want to say, here's another example, and you just put this one out. Colin Boza,
Yes.
CEO of Boza Properties.
Past guest.
He outlined 5 things to think about if you're investing in real estate. Here's his top 5 tips.
Yeah.
Now, if you haven't listened to the show for a while, or you listened to Colin back in 2019, when was that?
I think 2020. I think it was 2020 because we were talking COVID.
Oh, was it COVID?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we were
I thought
talking
it was even
COVID.
before that. Anyway, we're just bringing back the best of.
But this is the best thing for me because I never listen back. I don't think you
No,
listen back either. I can't stand watching myself or listening to myself. So I don't listen back. But what this is forcing me to do is to revisit a lot of the concepts over the past almost 7 years of doing this. And man, there are some amazing takeaways. Like there really are. And this is the best format to get it in.
So it's at Vancouver Real Estate Podcast.
That's how you get there, Matt. I know you haven't been on, but let's get you on.
Well, yeah, okay, and let's cut to this. This is in depth, long form. Tom Davidoff, Professor Tom Davidoff, and Professor Andrey Pavlov.
This is like you went to what's that?
I don't even think the university's producing content like this.
No,
honestly,
no.
I don't want to
think
toot our
this
own
is-
horns.
You know what? What's that? What's the Masters pub at UBC? I can't remember. I used to go there and talk.
Little flex,
I used to go,
little flex there.
I used
the
to go-
Masters pub.
Yeah, no, it's actually called. It's
Okay.
it's called the Masters.
They wouldn't even
pub.
let me on campus.
Yeah. I used to go there and talk Foucault.
All right.
Not real. How you like them apples? I used to be in the window.
Andrey Pavlov, Tom Davidoff. Enjoy.
Okay, so we're here with Tom Davidoff, Associate Professor at the Sauder School of Business at UBC, and Andrey Pavlov. He is a Professor of Finance at the Beatty School of Business at Simon Fraser University. I should say you two, today you're adversaries, but you typically collaborate on you have in the past on academic articles. And Matt, I'll let you do the honors.
Past guest fan favorite, I think, for both. And we've also had a debate back in, it was pre-COVID. I can't recall exactly when, but it was at Tom's around Tom's kitchen table, I think, last time. So thanks for coming down to the studio. Maybe for listeners who don't know or haven't heard either of you on the show, can we maybe start just by Tom, you telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm an economist. I teach at the Sauder School of Business at UBC. I teach undergrad and MBA and the occasional PhD course on economics and real estate finance.
And Andrey?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I'm at the SFU, a finance prof, and I mostly teach real estate and credit risk for finance students. So pretty similar background overall.
So, we were trying to think of a good way to kick this off. We organized the event because there was some news late last year about differing perspectives on taxation, I think property taxation in Vancouver. Maybe I'll start with you, Andrey. Does Vancouver have a taxation problem?
Yes, but not real estate taxation. Yeah, our income taxes and sales tax and gas tax and airport fee tax and all of those are very high. Yes, we do have that problem. And including, actually, I said not property tax, but actually including property taxes, in my view, as we discussed last time we were together, in my view, Vancouver property taxes are very high. So Vancouver single-family home owners pay the highest property tax in Canada. And I understand we're going to get into it, I'm sure, but I understand rates are low, tax rates are low, but you multiply the rate by a very high typical house price, and you get a very high dollar amount. So Vancouver single-family homeowners pay the highest. Vancouver apartment owners are not quite so bad. They're about average for Canada because obviously apartments are a little bit cheaper. But still overall very, very high tax rates in dollar terms. And that's hard to swallow because I don't feel so far that our city services have been all that great.
So you don't feel like we get what we pay for?
No, I don't. Just try to do a permit on a siding and you'll know.
Tom, maybe the same question, because I know that there was some research done that you shared at the very least with some grad students at UBC, where my sense is you feel differently about property taxes.
I do. And I would agree with Andrey, though. We have high taxes on a lot of activities, and we certainly have a regulatory system that is not functioning as well as it could. Rules are very strict, and it takes a long time to get stuff processed. I would say, though, let's just take a step back and think about the property tax for public benefits trade-off. Vancouver is a fantastic city, and services in many ways are great. There are definitely crime problems, but overall, we live in a place where you can go out at night and feel good about it. You can park your bike downstairs and, have a reasonable expectation it'll be there when you get out. So what's it worth a year, right? I mean, let's throw in schools, right? I mean, send a kid to school, walk the streets safely, get the streets cleared sometimes in the event of snow, trash collection regularly. That's worth a lot of money. I mean, you'd pay a lot in condo fees for that. So what does a homeowner pay for that? Well, if you're a single-family homeowner, suppose you're at a benchmark around $2 million. What are you paying? $6,000, a little more than that a year for all of that? That doesn't strike me as a lot of money. What does strike me as a lot of money is how much you have to pay in just income tax. Forget sales tax, but let's just do income tax if you had to buy that place qualifying with 20% down. So, roughly, what do you multiply your income by 4, at least under lower interest rates, to qualify under the stress test? So $2 million house, you need $500,000 in income. You're well over $100K in taxes. And, $100K in income tax. So, and that's the penalty for working for a living versus $6K to buy the house. Now, what does Canada want you to do more of? Do we want more people working and selling stuff, or do we want more people buying property? There's no more property to buy. So to me, load up on the property taxes, go easy on the income taxes. But we're so unbelievably out of whack on that relationship.
So it sounds like we're incentivizing the wrong things.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to it later, but I'll just mention now the study I did with those two students, Craig James and Paula Cabre. And half the people who own super expensive properties around Greater Vancouver pay basically nothing in income tax. So the median owner, so take the top 5% of properties, the fanciest properties around Greater Vancouver, line up the owners from the lowest income tax payer to the top. The guy in the middle is paying about $16,000 a year in income tax compared to, at that purchase price, you're talking $400K in income tax if you qualify. So something's wrong.
Andrey, I know I know you responded to, you looked at more recent, as I understand it, 2018, 2019 census data, and you had a fairly specific response to that research that was done.
Yeah, might as well get that out of the way, even though I'm hoping the topic we discussed today is a little more than this. Because I think just based on what we started with, we're going to discover, I know this was structured as a debate, but we're really going to discover that we're much closer, Tom and I, in pretty much on a lot of things than it appears if we just look at tweets and brief statements. So that's why I'm so happy we're together in person, because I'm hoping we come up with some ideas, because sure, we disagree here and there, but if we agree on something, that is probably a good idea. So let's try to identify those. But let's talk about the study briefly, just to kind of get it out of the way. So obviously, I'm assuming that this math in the study was done right. That's not the issue. The issue is that it looks at 1 year of income tax. And that's pretty simple. Buying a house is the outcome of lifetime earnings and savings, possibly multiple lives, right? It's possibly two partners coming together. It's who knows, right? But it's lifetime earnings or longer. So looking at, but the earnings are the study looks at is just 1 year. So this is like figuring out how much we've walked since we started talking right now to determine how much we've walked over the whole morning, right? Well, if you look at how far we've walked just now in the last minute or two, that's not going to get you very far, right? We've been sitting around here, but I walked half the city to get here, right? So it's a third. Okay, not half, a third.
Wow.
I'm exaggerating. I happen to park pretty far. Doesn't matter. The point is, we both, Tom biked, I understand,
Yes,
right?
correct.
So there you go. Tom has traveled pretty far today already. But measuring the last minute or two is not representative of how far he's traveled today. Same thing with income. You can't look at 1 year of income to determine lifetime of earnings and savings. And then the other issue is this income is just basically salary and capital gains, things that are directly taxable. It doesn't include, again, lifetime earnings related to previous real estate investments or other investments, capital gains that happened the previous year but not this year, or that haven't been realized but you can borrow against them, right? So there's a whole bunch of income, and that is not accounted in that one single tax payment. So it really, at the end of the day, it really means nothing. 1 year of income, you would expect actually people who buy a $3.7 million home to work less, right? They've made it, right? They've somehow saved and worked in the past somewhere else maybe, and they've made it. And why would they have a salary that pays income tax now? So they're retired or reduced hours or something. So the study totally makes sense, but it doesn't mean homeowners don't pay income taxes. All it means is that the income taxes have been paid at another time and another place. So Tom, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but this opens the path, I think, to a place where we can agree on.
Well, there's a lot there that I do agree with. It's certainly true, wealth is a stock and income is a flow, and they don't necessarily match. Now, I will say, if the story, sometimes you take a year off or, you sold the business, whatever, that would show up in maybe 5, 7, 10% of cases. It shouldn't be showing up in 50% of cases. Maybe 2018 was some crazy anomaly year where everybody with money was just taking some time off in 2018, anticipating COVID, kind of, getting their act. I mean, I'm making a bit of a joke there. I don't think that's what happened. And, the money does probably come from elsewhere, right? It could be a lifetime of work. It could be retirees who made their money in Toronto. It could be trust fund hippies whose parents made a lot of money. It could be, and I think there's reason to believe it is, children or the people themselves who've earned money overseas. But, then the question is that what we want in Vancouver? Is that what we want to reward? Do we want to be the place, hey, you crossed the finish line, welcome to your palatial home, here's the low property tax you deserve? I don't think so. I think probably right now the public policy crisis we have is people who are trying to work for a living around Greater Vancouver. And I think we want to design a tax policy and a government system that is friendly to work for a living and find a place to live. And again, I do think Andrey and I probably agree on a fairly wide range of policies that would make that possible, particularly on the supply side, is my guess.
So, and just thinking about this, because I know over the years we've talked a lot about Vancouver being an anomaly in terms of, I guess, either how high the taxes are or how low the taxes are when it comes to property, right? I know that back in 2016, when we first had you on the show, Tom, the idea was that it's a pretty cheap place to store money. Are we still are there other in North America? let's say, are there other areas that you can point to where the income tax and the property tax are kind of skewed the way that you're suggesting?
I mean, most of the U.S., right? So, New Hampshire would be a classic place north of Boston with almost no income tax. They have a lot of high earners come exit Boston to go live there, and but high property taxes. Greater New York, where Wall Street's located, income taxes are not low, but they're lower than they are here, and property taxes you really pay. Now, the U.S. system's different in a way that's a little controversial, which is each municipality pays for schools with its own property tax. And depending on how you look at things, that's great because you can pick the jurisdiction that matches your tastes. You want to have almost private school quality, great education. Well, you can have, your property taxes pay for that in a Greenwich, Connecticut, or, most of Westchester, New York, parts of Jersey. Or if you can't afford good schools, you can find a low property tax, low property value town. The other way to look at it, though, is if you're the child of rich parents, you're going to go to this elite jurisdiction and have amazing public schools. And if you're the child of poor parents, you're going to be stuck in a low-income trap where the schools are lousy and the peers don't have the same parental investment that raises all boats. So it's a different system. But yeah, there's lots of places in the U.S. where you pay very high property tax, something like 2%, despite high property values. And it's just a different system.
I kind of want to unpack the idea that if you live in a more expensive property, you should either pay more income tax or pay more property tax, which is I think what you're getting at. So does it really matter? And I know I know why you think it matters, but what are some of the complications with people not paying a lot of income tax living in some of the most expensive real estate in Canada?
Well, it's money. It's $2 billion a year. So is what we came up with. So what we had suggested is, look, you'd be paying a lot of your income if you're a significant earner. On the margin, you're paying 50% plus in British Columbia. So, you're going to get to a quarter of your income in income tax roughly if you can really, off of income, afford a high-end home around Vancouver. But that's a crazy ask. No one's going to require that everybody do that. First of all, there's a lot of retirees, and you probably have to just totally exempt retirees from any test like that. A lot of them bought a long time ago. And moreover, if you're retired, you played your financial game under one set of rules. To have it shifted on you when you can't adapt by changing how many hours you work or whatever, that's just not going to fly politically. But what we said is, okay, in working age, what if everybody has to pay 1% of their property value in income tax? If you already do, and most people pay a lot more than that, no change. But if you're 25 years old and your dad just bought you a $3 million house, that's $30K a year you got to pay in income tax or some kind of tax, or we'd call it, sort of an alternative minimum tax based on property value. And, so what happens to the 25-year-old who doesn't work for a living, who has to pay $30K a year? Well, they might sell the house and the house gets redeveloped or bought by somebody who works for a living. I think that's probably a healthy thing. And just in terms of numbers, it's not about, necessarily the fairness of who gets to live where. It's $2 billion is how much you'd get just from the top 10% of properties if you put that in. And, $2 billion that's a lot of help for the homeless, building rental housing, providing that renter's subsidy that the province has been promising for a long time.
Do you agree, Andrey?
Well, a lot was said here, so let's unpack this one at a time. So, as I said, I always try to find a place where we do agree, and clearly Tom and I agree that our income taxes are unbelievably high, and regulation is stringent. We can talk about that in a minute as well. So let's tackle that big problem first. Let's drop income taxes and let's drop regulation before we do anything else. And not only we haven't done that, we've gone the opposite way. And it's interesting because Tom and I have been friends for a long time, and we had exactly the same discussion when we were developing the speculation and vacancy tax proposal. And the speculation and vacancy tax proposal had exactly the same thinking. It needs to be revenue neutral, and anyone who pays any tax anywhere in Canada can use that tax to offset their speculation and vacancy tax payment. So dollar for dollar. So yeah, if you're making any money in Canada and you're paying tax, that tax offsets your speculation vacancy tax payment. So the point was, you come from somewhere else, you haven't contributed to the Canadian society in any way, but now you benefit. Well, it's fair to ask you to pay a little, right? Nothing wrong with that, we thought at the time. So that was the proposal. Of course, what we got is completely different. What we got is a tax that is primarily paid by local British Columbians who are earning and paying taxes in British Columbia. So that income tax offset never happened. Income taxes did not go down as a result. The speculation vacancy tax was not revenue neutral. So it just became another slush fund. So then our politicians can pull $500 million out of thin air to buy out apartment buildings for rather than increase supply. So I'm sure that will come up at some point too. But this is wrong, right? So we created a monster that collects more taxes from people. To my view, not to no benefit to anyone, but actually to the detriment of everyone, including rentals, including renters. So that's my concern. Let's agree income taxes and regulation are way too high. Let's lower that first because we are long overdue. And that pattern is not just speculation and vacancy tax. The carbon tax was also advertised as revenue neutral. It was supposed to be revenue neutral. If you had low carbon emissions like Tom does because he bikes, right? And by the way, I bike too, not today, but I bike to school every day. So Tom and I should be better off under the carbon tax regime. And we're not. We're not, because the moment you get some threshold of income, you get no carbon tax rebate, but you still pay the tax for just heating your home. So our government, both federal and provincial, have a history of introducing measures that may have some economic foundation only as long as they're revenue neutral. But they are never revenue neutral. They are always just another way to tax people more. So what I'm concerned is that we're going to go down that path. We're going to increase property taxes, but we're not going to decrease income taxes or regulation in any meaningful way.
I just want to say one thing here, which isn't really an argument with Andrey at all. I just want to point one other channel where you cannot pay a lot of income tax, actually, which is a lot of the high net worth people around British Columbia. They do work. They work hard, but they have small businesses, and there's a corporate tax, which is probably fairly low, but wouldn't count on what we've measured. I don't think that's what's going on in the data. I think it's people who've made money in the past or who inherited money. But that is another channel. But income taxes affect that choice, right? Every time you go to the dentist, you're visiting a corporation, not a dentist, and that's not particularly efficient. But that's what the tax code generates. And I'm sure we could point to cases where somebody really ought to be an engineer working for a corporation, but he's doing some kind of business setup because that's what our tax system says.
So actually, from personal experience, that there was advantage to that. It's gone now. And that's a whole other topic. In my view, removing that advantage is partly responsible why we have no doctors and dentists and engineers and architects these days. So, but
great point about doctors, by the way. That the doctor crisis really does seem to coincide with the removal of that incentive.
Yeah. So we removed the incentive, which was a negotiated benefit. Doctors basically said, instead of getting higher fees, we're gonna be able to run our business through a corporation. Yeah, sure, that increases our paperwork a little bit, but it does reduce our taxes most of the time. And then Justin Trudeau came into power, and the first thing he did was remove that benefit because of fairness, but did not bring the doctor fees back to where they would have been otherwise. And now we have no doctors. Well, this is not a surprise.
Sorry, I didn't realize medical doctors cannot incorporate.
No, they can, but in the past, you could distribute your income to various family members.
Right, I remember when this came in.
There were some advantages, right? Well, that was negotiated benefit. That was, instead of bringing your fees to what they really should be, based on how many years you've been in medical school and how much income you've forgone to do that, we're going to give you this tax benefit. Same, governments love that because on the books, it's appeared they're not spending quite as much money, while in reality, they're spending the same money. But that was the negotiated benefit. And then suddenly that was taken away, but only one side of it. And so we have a history. The point here is, I'm not an accountant, so I'm a little bit out of my depth on all of this. I apologize if I'm wrong on any of this, but the point remains that we have a history of inventing these taxes and fees that are based on some economic foundation, only if they're revenue neutral. But then we end up actually adding them to the existing taxes and never actually reduce income taxes or regulations. So let's start there, because we're long overdue before we have any conversation about raising property taxes. And then I want to come back to what Tom said on our property taxes. So yeah, sure, great place. Obviously, Tom and I and you guys, a lot of people choose to live here. I get it. It's a nice place. How much of that is due to city services? Because the first time my bike got stolen from my garage, I got a phone call from a police officer, not a visit, a phone call. And the second time my bike got stolen from my garage was I had to fill an online form. I didn't even get a phone call. So as far as I'm concerned, the city has spent $0 on me to protect my bike. Now, obviously, we have insurance, so it's not like I'm complaining. That's not a big financial dent, but over time, it adds up, right? And certainly the inconvenience and annoyance are huge, and it's wrong. Regardless of whether big or small, that is a wrong thing to do. So I think our city services are nowhere near what they should be. So last year, my garbage collection around Christmas was, my garbage didn't get picked up for a month, right? Now, this year was a lot better, thankfully. We have a new administration, so I'm very hopeful. And things do seem to be turning around very quickly. So maybe we'll get now the value that we've been paying for. But certainly as of last year, that was not at all the case. And finally, how is it that other cities in Canada can make ends meet and provide the same services or better with lower dollar taxes? Because the fact that a home is more expensive doesn't make city services more expensive. It costs the same amount of money to collect your garbage, whether your home is 100,000 or 100 million. It is the same amount. So the fact that our property taxes are linked to property values already makes them progressive in a way that people with high property values are subsidizing everyone else because they're paying more for the city services they consume. All right, a lot said.
I feel like, Tom, you probably have responses to that. And I, as I understand, we have basically the first comment was about the BC spec and vacancy tax, which I think you've been on the show talking about before. I guess a response there.
Yeah, I mean, Andrey brought up a couple of legitimate issues, I think, both of which are debatable, but it's not a home run either direction. So the first is, suppose you live in Toronto, you make a load of money as a lawyer, and you have a vacation place in Vancouver, right? So the question is, should you get to say, well, do you get to write off your Ontario income tax for your BC property, or should the write-off only be for a primary residence? My view, primary residence. I don't think second homes are a thing we need to worry about the affordability of. We don't have a second homelessness problem so much as a first homelessness problem. But the point is not a crazy one, that if you pay income tax anywhere in Canada, that ought to count as an exclusion. That's a political question. Another political question is when you move towards efficiency, by saying, look, we're going to shift the property, the more dollars are going to be raised from property relative to income. Now, you can get there by cutting income taxes, you can get there by raising property taxes, or you can get there by doing both. Now, I think anytime you make a proposal about a policy change, I think the right way to do it is to propose balanced budget, because then you're not saying smaller government, you're not saying bigger government, you're saying we think there should be a shift in the way we raise revenue. Now, as for, big picture, is it bad if what happens is overall taxes go up every time you fix a tax problem, like encourage people to ride bikes with a carbon tax or walk longer from their parking space? or or you say, we ought to be taxing inelastically supplied housing instead of elastically supplied labor and sales. Should you spend more money or not when you find those efficiencies? That's a political question, right? I mean, there are some people who would say, look, the most important thing is the government not steal from people. And that's a legitimate perspective, that a lot of people think what government's in the business of doing is raising revenue and having their political allies get the benefits. Another view is, we're a rich city and we have lousy public schools. What's up with that? How? I mean, they're not lousy. I don't want to say our public schools are lousy, but they're not what they should be. So, we're shutting down programs. How could we be this rich and not have great public schools? Obviously there's people sleeping on the street in the cold. What a terrible way to live. Now, it's a really hard problem to solve. And if you start solving the problems of homelessness, maybe people, migrate in to take advantage of a better place to suffer relatively. So, should we be spending less money as a city? I think if we do, we're going to have stolen bikes and more people on the street. And that's a real trade-off.
Just thinking about going back to because one thing that I wasn't entirely clear on, Andrey, was raising more tax revenue and it actually being a detriment. Can you speak to unpack that when you were talking about the BC spec and vacancy tax?
Yes, happy to do that. But before, let me address this one point. You'll
Sure.
call that in case I forget it. And Tom is absolutely correct. Our public schools are not bad, but they can be a lot better, and they should be a lot better. And there are a lot of people in need and suffering in BC who need help, and helping them is great. Where we disagree is how to get there. So to me, it is our high tax and high regulatory system that is causing this. This is chasing away businesses. We really aren't able to make anything in BC. We're cutting trees, shipping them to China to be sliced, and then shipping them back here. Like, these kind of things are absurd. So start there. I do want to help, but the way to help better is actually by reducing our income tax and our regulation. So if people actually choose to do things here, rather than just provide the absolute minimum here and do as much as possible elsewhere. And then the resulting economic boom will provide enough revenue for better schools and to help the homeless. And similarly, on the income, on the problem with increasing property taxes is, you say land cannot move, and you're right, land cannot move, but those people that are coming will not come. So land is very much movable because the value of the land is movable, not land itself. We understand we're not going to be moving the dirt, but the value moves because the value is created by the people on it. And if we start to raise property taxes without a drastic reduction and reform of the income tax and our regulatory system, we're not going to get those people coming in. And we want them because they're spending their money, and when they buy a home, they also renovate and hire people and are members of the community, and so on and so forth. So it is not true to say we can raise property taxes as much as we want without a resulting economic impact. The resulting economic impact, the way we're set up, will actually be worse because already we've chased away anyone who can go away in terms of manufacturing or services provision. So I see Tom has a point on that. Let's talk about this, and then we'll come back to what you asked.
Absolutely.
Well, maybe there's a segue, which is, there's a fixed number of seats in British Columbia. So what do prices do? What do the crazily high prices and rents that everybody struggles with do? They allocate the seats. And, allocating the seats means if you don't pay the price, you're out. So right now, who's out? Yeah, I got my degree. I can earn a decent living in Vancouver, but boy, it's a lot cheaper in Calgary or Winnipeg or Toronto. Well, not cheaper in Toronto, but, it's a different place. Halifax, Montreal, what have you, right? So we scare people away. So, somebody's going to get scared away. Now, do we want to have that engineer? So if there's a choice, should it be the 25-year-old trust fund hippie, or should it be the 25-year-old recent grad who wants to work for a living? right now, unfortunately, we sort of have to choose between both. Probably the person who leaves is neither. Probably the person who leaves is someone who makes, a limited income with a more limited human capital, and they're the ones who have to exit the province. Ideally, what I think Andrey and I agree on is we want more people to get to live here. And one way might be a more efficient tax system. I think that would make a more dynamic economy. I think there have to be ways to cut taxes to improve the employment picture. I don't know how much of a difference that would make, but I do know letting more people live in homes in British Columbia would do it. And of course, 70, 80% of the land are in Greater Vancouver, single family only, which, you're looking at $500,000 or else no home for you.
So that's a real issue, the fixed number of seats. This is our choice through paperwork and red tape and regulation. We're limiting the seats on purpose. So when we're looking at our high rents and high prices, don't point the finger at foreigners or locals or people who are trust fund babies or none of that. I mean, all of those obviously have an impact, but the real cause is our policies are artificially limiting supply.
Mhm.
And Tom points to single-family homes. I point to the agricultural land reserve. Whatever, both of those are in play, and we're really artificially limiting the number of seats. And as Tom says, despite poor city services, the place is still nice, right? It's a fantastic place to live, no question about that. People want to come. Limited seats, price goes up, no question there. But the solution is to increase the number of seats, not to let government allocate where the seats are. Because if we let the government say, oh, no, you're a trust fund baby, you're not going to be here, we're going to give it to another one who works. Well, yeah, but the one who works then is going to have less incentive to do so. They're going to have less incentive to go to school, and they're going to have less incentive to work hard and save, because they know eventually they'll be shifted to the bad guys and they'll have a target painted on their back.
Yeah, if I can just extend the seat analogy a little bit, a lot of people look at a concert, and it's Ticketmaster or whatever the company is that,
Right.
oh, that's terrible. Look
The
at what
Taylor
they're doing.
Swift. The
Instead
Taylor
of the
Swift.
real Taylor Swift fans, the people who wind up going to see Taylor Swift are just the people who are willing to pay the most to see Taylor Swift. Well, that's kind of the way things are ultimately going to work, and probably should be. So the problem is, the real problem we have is not enough seats to see Taylor Swift. And so, what's the analogy here? What's the Ticketmaster everybody complains about? I don't think real estate investment trust REITs are particularly active in Greater Vancouver. But I just heard, the very, very good, usually Stephen Quinn show with a political panel, where nobody wanted to stand up to the claim that the big problem we have to solve is real estate investment trusts buying apartments here. That's not the problem at all. I wish there were more apartments owned by real estate investment trusts. And the key is more apartments. So, chasing away allocation, through the private sector, that's just not a solution.
So that's the segue to the question I think you had earlier on my statement that we raise all these taxes, and not only they're not helping us, they're, obviously I'm taking this to an extreme. I realize a lot of the taxes we collect are doing good. They're building roads and paying for schools, and so I'm not saying zero government at all.
Sure.
But our government is way too big and way too involved in every aspect of our life. And one typical example, the example I was referring to, is the most recent announcement of a $500 million fund to buy existing rental properties. And in that announcement, Premier David Eby specifically referenced REITs, real estate investment trusts, as being the culprit. They're coming in and buying all these apartment buildings, and they're redeveloping them. And in doing so, they're kicking out the tenants. So we're going to buy these apartments before REITs can, and we're going to protect the tenants. So it sounds really good politically, I get that. But this is a typical example, a prime example of how taxpayers' funds are used to hurt us, and especially renters, not help. And the reason this announcement in particular hurts the renters is you're basically spending taxpayers' money to disrupt what people who want to build and expand supply are trying to do. So you're spending taxpayers' money to restrict rental supply. It's so we will be better off if we take this $500 million and dump it in the ocean, than run a fund that we really will, because we're just we're using it to sabotage people who want to build more. And then we're going to say, well, what about the people who are already in those buildings, right? That's the intended group. The thing is, they're not better off either, because by constricting supply, sure, we're helping them and we're allowing them to this falling apart to live in this building, even though it's falling apart. But the moment they have to move because they got a new job, or they got a bigger family or a smaller family, whatever, life changes. The moment you have to move, all that help goes to zero. And now you're stuck trying to find a place in a market that has no supply. So even the people we're intending to protect, the very individuals that live in those buildings, even they are worse off because of that policy. So why not? The solution is, in my view, allow building, remove the obstacles to building a lot more, and then competition will protect those people, right? If you have a bad landlord, you're gonna move. And that's how things are, from what I understand, in Seattle. There's vacancy and choice and
a lot more purpose-built rental, right?
a lot more purpose-built rental.
In Seattle?
Oh, right. Yeah. You have to, because you can't build condos because of the lawsuits.
Right.
Well, whatever the reason is, the solution is very clear. A lot more purpose-built rentals. Seattle had 18,000 units built in 2018, pre-pandemic, in 1 year. And then, sure, there are bad landlords in Seattle, I'm sure, and there are abusive landlords in Seattle, I'm sure. You just move because the place down the street is not only has availability, but they're offering you $2,000 Amazon gift card if you move to their place. So it's easy to move.
Well, I think we should talk about that, because that was one of the questions we had. Is it seems in Vancouver we have these demand shocks in the market, and then we see a lot of project starts, and we see supply coming online, and then we see demand stop, and then we typically see projects stall, and we see these gaps of new inventory coming on from the development community. At least that's what we've talked about on the program at length in the past. And I guess that's the thing. So what role should government be in the creation of supply, if any? And how can we kind of get past these periods where we have these stops, these gaps in the market for creating supply?
Well, we need to look at, and Tom, I'm taking over the waves here. I'll give you a turn, but I have an immediate quick answer to this, and it is, the reason those projects stops is that it's so expensive to build in BC. And it is primarily due to government regulation and high taxes on development. We're taxing housing like cigarettes. We almost want to discourage it. So because of that, the required rate of return on any development is through the roof. And then the moment the market becomes a little shifty, you can't make ends meet, because you still have to pay all these huge taxes and meet the ridiculous regulation that we have. So the solution there is cut back regulation, reduce the building code to only health, safety, and impact on neighbors, and then reduce taxes on housing development. We want to encourage housing. We don't want to discourage it. And then people will be able to build projects even when in a softer market, because those projects will be viable. Now, we also have the issue of land prices. So some developer may have paid a huge amount for the land, and that's what prevents them from finishing the project. Well, that's fine. The solution there is to make sure every land that we actually have available is allowed and can be developed on. And we're not doing that. We have a number of artificial restraints on land use. Tom says single-family houses and the zoning. I say restrictions on land use, like the agricultural land reserve. Both are at play. Either way, the outcome is there's no land, so land is very expensive.
Cigarettes, Tom. Tax like cigarettes.
Yeah, well, impact fees are a tricky one, and I think they can be done better or worse. And, forbidding somebody from throwing out tenants. So, for example, the Broadway plan, the sort of right of return of tenants, it's an interesting one. I mean, I totally agree with Andrey. Tenants are put in a terrible position because there's not enough rental housing. And so you're gripping, with your last ounce of strength to stay in the place where you live. And whether that's rational or irrational, for an individual property, obviously the incumbent tenant is worse off if that individual property is redeveloped. So it would be totally rational, given an overall level of supply, for the tenants of a rent-controlled building who've been there for 15 years to say, absolutely not, city, don't let this get redeveloped. Whether in the aggregate, the renters along Broadway should be in favor of more apartment construction on Broadway is an interesting question, because there's pros and cons. The con is they lose their current place. The benefit is there's a better overall rental supply. But I think giving renters another alternative, which is let's really, and I think Andrey and I agree, let's really let's have it. Let's really open up land to supply. Whether you need to lower fees or not, I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't think the city wants every property redeveloped all at once, or the province. And so, you ought to set redevelopment pricing so that you get as much redevelopment as you want. If we think the fees are getting in the way, if you look and you say, hey, upzoning for sale, and everybody's like, not at that price, I'm not going to develop, which will happen this year, 100%, then maybe you look at the pricing and say we're overcharging. If, on the other hand, developers are tripping over themselves to get zoning permission, and the bottlenecks are either at City Hall or the labor market, which I think is worth pointing out. There is a question of, even if the government got completely out of the way, how much construction could happen all at once based on private sector contractor shortages and skilled labor shortages? I don't know. But so pricing could be too high. It could be chasing off development. I think the bigger culprit is just the inavailability of developable sites. And, and again, part of that is mountains and oceans, and part of it, though, is, of course, regulation.
I'm just thinking about and this is going back, I guess, we started talking about taxation, which I think is like a, part of the issue, but obviously not the overarching broad issue. And I'm just thinking about the last, say, since 2016, we had the foreign buyers tax, we had the BC spec tax, we have had the empty homes tax, we've had the school tax. We've had all sorts of measures that are meant to constrict demand. And I'm just wondering, are we better off right now in either of your minds today than we were in, say, let's call it 2012, 2014? Like, is it worth the energy, I guess, because I know you guys agree on supply. Obviously, I think we all can agree on we need more supply, but yet we're talking about, taxation. And I'm just wondering, are we better off now? And is it kind of worth the and we talk about it all the time too, is it worth the breath, right? Curious to hear your thoughts.
Gee, my breath is free. I can see that's absolutely worth that. No question. Neither are good, right? So clearly 2012 or any year or right now, neither are good. Now, is it better or is it worse? I think it's obviously worse. Tom will probably think it's better. I don't know. But vacancy rates has remained at 1% for rentals in Vancouver. So when it comes to what actually matters, we're not better, we're not worse, we're the same. We have not solved our problem. That $500 million announcement, there was a quote in there that said, we have our rental apartments today, the number of rental units today are comparable to the early 90s, but the population has increased 50%. And I don't know where that statistics came from, but it feels right. I think that was one good thing that in that announcement, it highlighted the overarching problem that we have. So at least since the 90s, relative to the 90s, we're certainly not better off. But the issue is our solutions are always more government involvement, more taxes, more regulation to the cost of homeowners or workers. And because of that, no one wants to, it's very difficult to build. And Tom is correct. There is an optimal fee for construction, for development, because when you develop something, you impose costs on the neighbors, so you should compensate them. But we know where we are today. This fee is way, way, way too high because we're not getting enough development. And you might say, well, today is a soft market. Well, we weren't getting enough development in 2018 or 2019 when it was a normal market, pre-pandemic, right? Because we can look at the numbers, and the numbers of units we built, especially rental housings, are dismal. We're averaging like 1,200 units a year, while Seattle built 18,000 in 1 year.
One thing I would point out, and I completely agree we should be building more, is part of the issue is people don't build condos in the States. They build purpose-built rental, and we built a lot of condo in Vancouver. I mean, we had a lot of construction the last 10 or so years. And some of that difference is condo here versus rental there. And I don't know exactly why that's true. I think part of it is this litigation risk that you face in the U.S. After 5 years, the warranty expires, and any lawyer has a strong incentive to get the condo association to sue the developer. And so anticipating that, the developer says, maybe I'll just do purpose-built rental because the tenants can't sue me in the same way. So there's that.
But whatever the cause is, you're talking about the cause. The cause doesn't matter. The fact is Seattle built a lot more, and we have a normal rental market.
Well, I don't know that Seattle, I'd make 2 points. I don't know that Seattle, as a percentage of its supply, added more supply in apartments, greater Seattle than greater Vancouver. I'm not sure that's true. I am sure it's true on the purpose-built rental. But as for condo plus purpose-built rental divided by original population, I think Vancouver may have kept up with Seattle. I don't know. The other thing is, I would be leery of overselling how great it is for renters in Seattle. I think temporarily it was. I think there was a point where you were mentioning those gift cards from Amazon. New York had the same issue. I think New York was sort of overbuilt. People worried about overbuilt on rental. But then COVID happened. There were disruptions. And for a while, New York was cheap to rent in. But then when back to work alarms started ringing, it turned into an absolute horror show. So, one thing is, look, North America, particularly Canada, people want to move here. It's a fantastic place. The private sector can only do so much. So any policy intervention, you ask about empty homes, foreign buyer tax, I think every policy that's realistically on the table is a question of, I like to say, and my son actually called me out on this. He said, Tom, that logically it's the same thing. But I think verbally they sound different, which is, one is, can we make things better? I don't think we can make things better. I think we can make things less worse with good policy choices. So any policy that gets enacted from the right or from the left can't be judged on, oh my goodness, you tried this and things are more expensive today than they were 5 years ago. My personal view is that's just how it's going to be.
Can I just ask you, because I think about market rental and new condos coming to the market. When we talk about there's a limited number of seats, do we consider them both equal when we're having this conversation? Because I know home ownership seems to be at the forefront of a lot of young people's minds, right? There's a lot of people in Vancouver that don't want to be lifelong renters.
Yeah. To me, it's second order. And I think people really need to get a grip on this, right? There's benefits to having condo, which is there's no security of tenure like owning a place, A. B, flexibility of tenure. A condo can be both owned and rented. On the other hand, purpose-built rental is just better. Mom and pop artisanal landlord is not a professional. Who is a professional? A real estate investment trust or a pension fund. They know how to manage property. They're going to make more efficient choices than some condo owner who watched an episode of, Pimp My House or whatever and makes a decision about the backsplash.
Coming soon to TLC.
Anyway, what we need are more housing units. There's benefits to purpose-built rental. There's benefits to condos. I think the city has gotten way too hung up putting its thumb on the scale of purpose-built rental. And like Andrey says, you're spending a lot of money to basically push something in a direction that, whether it's a benefit or a cost, isn't obvious. Just get the units built. And if you want to help low-income people, this is something we learn in econ, I don't know, maybe not 1, but 1A or whatever. give poor people money. If they're not, drug addict, it's a different story. Just handing out cash is a little tricky. But, if you're a renter struggling to make a living here who's working a job and, doing their best in a single parent, something like that, give them money. Don't meddle and say, no, developer, don't build that condo. Absolutely not. Stop building. Stop. Build a rental instead. Don't spend your money on that. Spend the money on handing out cash, be it through a tax cut or an entitlement or whatever.
I love it. We absolutely agree with, and we've had that discussion before, so I know we're going to agree on that. The helping people by meddling with the market is no help at all. 9 out of 10 times, this actually ends up hurting the very few people you're trying to help. So if there are people we think we need to help, and of course, I think Tom and I agree there are people like that. Most people agree on that. Make sure, as long as they're mentally competent, you give them cash. You don't meddle with them. You don't give them a place to live, because then you're tying your help to a particular life situation. And the moment that life situation changes, nothing. And we want people to change their life situation. We actually want to encourage people to get a better job and get ahead in society and maybe move into a condo and buy and so on and so forth. Well, by locking them into a particular place, or the help is gone, we're making that upward movement harder. So yeah, let's if we're going to be helping people, let's help them, but leave the decisions with them. This is a great idea, and Tom and I have advocated for that many times in the past. But in the meantime, another component there is we need sufficient housing. We need competition among landlords, because the way it is in Vancouver, I have rented both from professional REIT owners in my life and from small landlords. And both were not great, because the landlord knows I have no place to go. Right?
I just as an aside, it makes me think my wife's a teacher, and some of her colleagues who rent will literally not call their landlord for any reason, basically because they're worried about losing their spot, that they've been there for 6 years or whatever, and they're terrified of being evicted. And I know, of course, the Residential Tenancy Act exists, but that's the situation. 35-year-old teachers who are kind of doing God's work are in the city, which is tragic.
I mean, imagine it, a couple, if you were both teachers, what a great thing to be. Like, nothing better. Andrey and I teach, but not that kind of teacher. Right. I mean, teaching kids, young kids. And younger than college.
What do you teach, though?
It's the best. Well, there's nothing better you can do. And we just stink a giant middle finger at a couple of married teachers in terms of the housing market.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's literally, it's like a constant thing that when I listen to, it's like, wow, you get the other side of it. It's like, oh yeah, we haven't had hot water for 3 months. It's like, Jesus.
But if you're the landlord, you also have no incentive to do anything, right? Because where the tenant's going to go, you're not going to lose your tenants. And you can't really afford to do much of anything, because, first of all, anything you want to do will require years of permitting and hassle with the city. And your property taxes have gone up, your input costs have gone up, your labor costs have gone up. Every cost you have has gone up tremendously. Rents have not. And so then even if you want to do it because it's the right thing to do, right? Not because you're worried tenants are leave, it's the right thing to do. So you decide to do it anyway, you can't afford to do it.
Right.
So we've created a situation where we're basically telling landlords don't do anything. And we're telling tenants stay put, don't complain. Don't do anything either. And we're dictating stagnation in our society. This is the opposite of what we want. We want dynamic society where competition protects renters because they can move. And in fact, we want to encourage them to move, hopefully to a better place with a better job and a better family situation, or whatever the circumstances are. We want people to move up.
It just strikes me, and just as curious to hear both your thoughts on this, and I think we've kind of circled it. If we were having this conversation 7 years ago, we'd be talking about foreign buyers. During COVID, I feel like we talked a lot about, It's speculators, local speculators. Now I feel like REITs are in the news. Is this just politics? Can we ever move past kind of the insanity of finding the boogeyman to blame du jour? Like, do you have any hope? Because this is actually it's a fairly depressing conversation, as we have a lot of depressing conversations. But generally speaking, is it just part of the political culture here? Are you optimistic?
So I don't know. I want to reference one of my kids, but I'm not going to mention who, because they are a great kid, and they might listen to this, and I don't want to put them down. But what I've discovered, I have 3 little kids, right? So what I've discovered is that they're incredibly creative when it comes to finding someone to blame for the mess they made, and just beyond anything I ever imagined, or anything I could come up with. And I think our politicians are the same way. Our politicians have done one thing right about housing, and that is create boogeymen, create culprits for our housing troubles. So we pointed the finger at everyone, as you said, except ourselves and our policies. And until we remove the red tape, regulation, and high taxes associated with housing supply, we're not going to get enough supply, and we're always going to have to keep finding new culprits. But we're running out, right? So we've gone through all of those. Now we're recycling them, right? So it was REITs in 2018 when there was the proposal for that $500 million fund came up. Now we see REITs again, right? So we're now starting to recycle them because we worked so hard, we've used them all up. So no, none of
So
those
efficient.
I mean, obviously, all of those things are at play, no question. Other than REITs, I don't see what the problem with REITs is. But the real culprit is we're restricting supply, we're taxing housing as if we want to discourage it, and as a result, we create a nightmare market. But we don't roll back regulation and red tape and taxes. Instead, we try to solve the problem with doing more of it. And we've done that since, 2012 you mentioned? But yeah, pretty much.
So I'm going to do 2 anecdotes, if I may, and then a serious answer. And I'll try to remember to get back to Andrey. So anecdote number 1, I had a Nobel Prize winner. I was lucky enough to work with Peter Diamond as a grad student. And I feel like all the stupidest things I've ever said were said in his office. And once we were talking about, studying housing markets, and it wasn't really his area. He did some foundational work that's important for housing on search and matching. But he was talking about, something about whether you could short housing, maybe was the discussion. And he said, well, there's rights. And I was like, what do you mean trading rights to housing? And he meant real estate investment trusts. And he must have thought I was an idiot for how does this guy think he's a student in real estate and he doesn't know what a REIT is. But he didn't know how to say it properly. So, and of course I couldn't say, you idiot, it's REITs, not rights. So,
Yeah.
okay, so that's one. 2, I'm going to do another story in terms of your question about will there always be a villain? And there will always be a villain. And, my sons, Yabi and Yobi, 2 great sons, I will name them. When they were very young, I remember I liked to ask them, okay, here's the scenario. Suppose you can have 1 scoop of ice cream and your brother has a scoop of ice cream. That's scenario A. Do you like that better? Or would you rather have scenario B, in which you have 2 scoops of ice cream, but your brother has 3 scoops of ice cream? And you can imagine what the answer was. 1 and 1 is much better than 2 and 3, because why does he get 3? So, we absolutely will find somebody to blame for our problems and unfairness. People don't like horizontal inequality. Like, we're sort of the same person, and yet that guy has more than I do. I think it's instinctive, no way around it. Now, where I'm worried is who's going to be the next villain. And it is very hard for me to believe that the next villain isn't going to be immigration. And I love immigration. Right. I'm an immigrant. I believe Andrey's an immigrant. You guys are regional immigrants. So everybody in this room, we're all children of immigrants because, unless you're First Nations, and even the First Nations came from somewhere. So, Immigration's a great thing. The idea that, somebody who's like grows up in a horrendous situation in a corrupt country with poverty where there's not enough investment in their human capital, they shouldn't be able to come to Canada and be a success. It's terrible. I have no patience for that argument, but it's going to be popular because it is a part of there's no way immigration's a net benefit for everybody. I mean, it makes real estate more expensive. If you have finite real estate, rents go up. How are we possibly going to have people who just can't live where they want to live and not get irritated in immigration? I don't see that any way that doesn't become a political, whatever. And I think that's unfortunate. I don't think people should have that attitude, but I don't see how people are going to avoid having that attitude. So I think if you want to pick a reason why we have to try our best to fix housing, that the vilification of immigrants is probably the number one concern I have. REITs, they're not, REITs aren't people. If people want to hate REITs and think incorrectly that REITs are the reason why housing's unaffordable, whatever. But immigration, I worry more about.
But it is problematic when David Eby is kind of fueling that fire, don't you think? I don't know if his policies are actually, well, I guess we've talked about it.
Well, just to be sure, you mean the REIT fire, not the immigration fire.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. But so there's another thing Tom and I agree with, and obviously I'm an immigrant. Everyone's an immigrant. And immigration is an engine of growth, right? There's no question about it. The issue we have is we're trying to stagnate our society, prevent people from moving, prevent people from finding homes, from building homes, and then then it's easy to find villains. So if we remove obstacles to sufficient supply and primarily red tape, regulation, and high taxes, if we do those things, remove those three things, there will be enough supply. And then, so people tell me, oh, well, we can't hold everyone from China and everyone from Bulgaria. I come from Bulgaria since we're speaking about immigration, right? Sure, we can. Canada has the second most land of any country in the world. So absolutely we can. Our housing troubles are entirely of our own making. There's no objective reason why Canadians cannot afford homes in Canada. And there's really no reason, in my view, that immigrants cannot afford homes in Canada either. So the fundamentals are here. All we need to do is remove regulation, red tape, and high taxes to allow sufficient supply in the market.
I largely agree. A couple points I'd make, though, is one is the fees, got to be careful. I think some fees are pretty healthy. They just raise revenue. And if you're already rationing development, you might as well charge for it up until the point where the fees are what's chasing you away rather than the regulations. But another point I'd make, unfortunately, is, there's tons of room in Canada. But, immigrants don't want to move to that part of Canada. They want to move to the part where there's not room. And I do think there's natural and private sector limits you'd run into if you deregulated. But let's find out. Let's get to that point.
As a final thought, I'm just thinking about where we've been building, and it is worth pointing out, like the city of Vancouver seems, back in 2014, 2015, I feel like we used to sell the odd pre-sale in Vancouver, and you don't hear about any new construction. I mean, I guess the Canby corridor, some townhomes in that neighborhood, a couple duplexes in Vancouver, but most of it's in Burquitlam, Burnaby, Coquitlam. It does seem like there are other areas, even in Metro Vancouver, that are doing it better than specifically the city of Vancouver.
Sure.
It's just atrocious. And I was thinking about it in terms of pre-construction, because we basically work in the city of Vancouver. There's nothing to sell. Like there's nothing. Like really, when you think of new projects.
8X on the park.
Right. Right. Those are the final units. So, and they launched probably 4 or 5 years ago.
They were held back.
Is Oak Ridge sold out?
No. And that's, and that's kind of an area where I feel like weirdly we don't really operate all that much, but no, those prices are high.
So let's remember that the new mayor, Kansim, promised in his campaign very clearly. He had this formula 3331, and I think it referred to 3 days approval for a renovation, a home renovation, 3 weeks for a single family home that conforms to zoning, 3 weeks for something else, and then 1 year for like a multifamily project, something like that. Let's hope this actually happens. And the fact that there's not enough staff at City Hall to do that, or there's not enough money, that's not an argument, because this is a profit center for the city. They can charge for that. So let's hope this happens, and let's hold our new mayor, who I'm very optimistic about. Let's hold him to this kind of promise, because that's a first step in getting sufficient supply.
Hey, same with red light enforcement. You know, I mean, you could hire a cop to pay for himself easy to stand at Arbutus and, the bike lane there. But, you know, there's how many red lights are there that you could enforce and pay for the cop? I don't know why they don't do it. Similarly, staff to process permits. Part of it's the fee. I mean, there's a fee that's too low, right? I mean, I think you can talk about, a lot of these fees are $250 and you're waiting 4 or 5 months for it. I'd rather pay $1,000 and get today's service. You know?
That was, I just went through it, and it was remarkably cheap, and it took remarkably long. That was the two takeaways to get a permit passed in Vancouver.
So if we have a fee for service, no problem with that. You're paying something to get something done, and the city is part of that, no problem, right? The fees and taxes I object to are things that are collected and put into a general pot that, in my view, then best case scenario gets wasted, worst case scenario is used to actually make people worse off.
Lexus lane, that's what we need. You pay $50,000, you get your permit in a week.
And the only thing there, though, is does that lead to certain developers and certain builders just taking over the market, right? Like
No, but you mean though Lexus lane. So if you want it quicker, you can pay to have it quicker. You don't mean privileged over.
Okay, I was thinking
that was one of the things that's been implemented too. Like certain preferred builders will get a.
That's what I was thinking of.
Which I think is really bad for especially small businesses.
You know what? And actually, this project that we haven't talked about on the show, but one of the comments that has been made is, we don't know the guy's doing it, and it was the my assumption was, I maybe should have, maybe I these guys come highly recommended, but the inspector at the city doesn't know them. Maybe I made the wrong choice, which is
which is how it works, right? I mean, now I think we've kind of made a bit of a cartel type situation in who's working in the city because of a lot of reasons around zoning and not only on wait times basically at the city, right? You want someone who knows people at the city.
We've
kept you guys long
I know
enough.
I feel like Tom had somewhere to go.
Didn't you? No, not particularly. I can do this all day.
The only other thing, if you guys have time, just maybe thoughts on what this year, what the headline of 2023 will be for the market, and then maybe kind of how this plays out in the next 2 or 3 years.
For pricing specifically.
Activity and pricing.
I think it's going to be interest rates. So actually, this is going to be one instance where it's not taxes and regulation and red tape. It's going to be interest rates. They have moved up the fastest ever to they're not unprecedented level now, but the move up has been tremendous. Like, we've never seen anything done so fast. And the problem with it is it takes 6 to 9 months for the interest rate increase to filter through the economy. So we're just starting to see the effects of the initial interest rate increases. We have no idea what the subsequent increases that we experience will do to the economy. So in my view, sure, the initial jump was needed, but because we had inflation, but I think we've gone too far. And let's hope we are able to bring interest rates down before we enter a severe recession, because the worst situation then would be inflation and unemployment, which is what, of course, everyone fears. So let's hope we keep interest rates. We bring them back down to maybe not to where they were, but a little lower, to prevent that scenario of inflation and unemployment at the same time.
So the headline reads, Bank of Canada gone too far.
Bank of Canada
Yeah, I
overshoots.
Yeah, I think it has gone too far, and I think they're realizing it. The recent announcements have been to slow down. Now, to be fair, there is an issue in the U.S., right? So Bank of Canada cannot fall too far behind the U.S. because that's automatic inflation, right? If the Canadian dollar falls, that's 1-for-1 automatic inflation. So we can't fall too far behind from the U.S. And the U.S. economy is doing better than Canadian economy at the moment. So we do have that bit of an issue. But even then, I'm hopeful that the Fed will also hold or even start reducing soon, because I also think they've gone too far. Just on the simple premise that it takes a long time for these things to filter to the economy. And we're just starting to see the effects of the initial interest rate increases. We have no idea what the later ones are going to do.
Yeah, I agree with Andrey. Interest rates are really important. And I think it's sort of like riding a mechanical bull or something like that, in the sense that we have seen prices come down, but we're not at fundamental prices if interest rates are 5.5 forever, right? People cannot afford homes at these prices, given these rates, and prices have to come down if these rates persist. I think a lot of people think they won't persist, and so prices are, sort of stagnating. Sellers won't accept these prices based on today's interest rates, but buyers can't really pay more, so we're at stalemate. But stalemate can't last forever, and so the question is, how many months of people getting their interest rates renewed, how many pre-sale condo buyers not being able to close come up before prices have to start correcting? Or we've got green shoots on inflation. We've had negative inflation readings. I think wholesale prices, they had good news today. We had consumer prices, some good inflation signal. So maybe the central banks get to start dialing even in the opposite direction rather than raising sooner rather than later. But I don't fault them at all for what they've done. I don't fault governments for spending too much money and causing inflation during COVID, because we had to keep people employed and, able to pay rent. And at the same time, central banks cannot be wimpy about inflation, because we just, entrenched inflation is a lousy thing, and we seem to have had it under control for 30 years, and that's a really good thing. So,
Do you think there's a chance we're back in a demand shock scenario in 2024?
Where we were just too many people searching for homes, prices explode? Absolutely, yeah. I mean, once the lid comes off with interest rates coming back anywhere near where they were, 3% or something like that, then I think we get into a pretty usual explosive Vancouver market.
Well, we'll leave it there. How can people find out more about what you guys are up to? Best way to learn more?
Oh, I think we're both on Twitter. Easy to find.
No. Elon Musk kicked me off. blogs.ubc.ca Davidoff, or write me a letter by hand or something like that.
Coffee. How about coffee? Meet me for coffee.
Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming down. It was thought-provoking, to say the least.
Excellent. Thank you for having us.
Thank you both, and thank you, Andrey.
So there you have it, folks. Our discussion with Professor Tom Davidoff and Professor Andrey Pavlov. The great debate, the tete-a-tete. There's no losers today, though.
No.
There's only winners, and it's us.
Yeah.
And the listeners, I think.
Yeah. Actually, Tom and Andrey, they had to come down to the studio. They had to spend some time.
They might both be losers.
We kind of took their morning.
They might both be losers.
I think in hindsight, they're probably wondering if we should have did this over the phone, but we appreciate having them in studio. And man, it's always good to have those guys on the program.
Oh yeah, that was great.
I will think back fondly throughout my life about shows with those two, because I feel like I always take so much away from them, and great minds, and definitely influencing the direction the province is taking.
Absolutely, yeah. They're two of the most important voices when it comes to BC housing, when it comes to the BC economy more generally.
There's no ivory tower here.
No, that's right. But Adam, before we go, what else do we got? First off, we have a new website.
Yes.
This is we actually teased it on Instagram.
We did.
This website, it's been around for about a week. I will say I'm super excited about it, in part because it's a site you want to spend some time with. You want to get to know this site. It's the write-ups are better.
in the biblical sense.
The write-ups are more. They're what juicy is not the right word.
No,
but they're,
it's a pretty good site. This is it's a site.
But it's really useful for searching.
Yeah.
All real estate topics. You
Yeah.
can find the episode in the write-up. It's you can go listen. You can read. It's just fantastic.
You want to spend time on the site. That's the one thing. I think what has changed with the site is that it reads very much now. It reads almost like a really great, rich article that you can there's links to click, there's places to go, there's stats, there's really great pull quotes. There's a ton of stuff.
Right.
Like it's just it is an experience outside of the podcast that you can have on this site. It's also easier to search. Like if you want to go to our site and you just want to listen to the shows on investing, you can now organize all the episodes that we have on specifically on investing.
You just want to focus on the commercial podcast, whatever.
Or developers, guests, or whatever you want to listen to. But it's all easy. It's all there at Vancouver Real Estate Podcast. At VancouverRealEstatePodcast.com. Let's just keep running. This mic is giving me a real...
That's right. VancouverRealEstatePodcast.com. I'll follow up with this when you're there. There's also the weekly mailer, the live wire. We have pre-sale, VIP pre-sale access, deal of the month, stats before anyone else, different types of stats. There's no reason why you shouldn't be on the live wire.
Sure.
Some really good incentives with pre-sales right now.
Yeah.
And who knows where we're headed here. The January stats came out, they were abysmal. There was 20 offers on a house in Burnaby last night.
Yeah.
It's like
there was 150 through at another house that I was through on the weekend.
It's
a wild
wild moment, but
tough to call.
But it's an interesting moment to look at some of those incentives in the pre-sale market for sure. We also have, of course, private client services.
Yeah, Matt, because if you are not using PCS, you are standing still while the rest of us power walk by. You get sold prices, days on market. You basically get realtor level information for free. It's available at your fingertips at VancouverRealEstatePodcast.com/PCS. Sign up for your own free account today. It is like the greatest time to have PCS, and I've had it for almost a decade, monitoring various markets. And now you can see what's going on, what's sitting, the price changes, everything's right there in your portal. There's no reason not to have it set up.
No, so there's the Livewire, there's PCS, there's just an abundance of information.
How do you get a shirt, though? How do you get a shirt?
VancouverRealEstatePodcast.com. That's on Instagram.
You got to go to Instagram.
You got to go to Instagram for the shirts. And we're at Vancouver Real Estate Podcast on there. Is that right?
Yes.
At Vancouver Real Estate
Podcast. Not like
Podcast.
6 A's in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Just at Vancouver Real Estate Podcast. And it's on Instagram.
And there's a lot of information being produced there as well. If you want to talk about that or anything else, give me a shout at any time, 778-847-2854 or Matt at VancouverRealEstatePodcast.com.
Or you can try me at 778-866-4574 or Adam at VancouverRealEstatePodcast.com.
We, of course, also have that Kokomo line, info at VancouverRealEstatePodcast.com.
Well, have a great week, guys, and we are back next week with another great show. Thanks so many people that reached out about not only what's going on Instagram, but also on the new site. We appreciate the VREP community recognizing the hard work that's going on into this. And if you enjoyed this episode or any other episode, please share it with a friend.
Absolutely. Have a good week.
Take care.